Postcards from a Dying World, the podcast. For more than a decade, I've reviewed over 1,000 books that are mostly science fiction, horror, and bizarro. This feed will feature bonus audio I have produced over the years, as well as a monthly digest of reviews based on what I've read each month, plus the occasional bonus material about my own fiction. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. I want to tell you ahead of time that this episode, featuring Rio Youers' return to Postcards from a Dying World, is being recorded in December. You're not going to hear it till February, around the time that this book comes out. So there's a little time travel involved with this story. So if any major world events that relate to No Second Chances happen, like a big celebrity crisis or something, we won't be commenting on it. But Rio, welcome back to Postcards from a Dying World.
Thanks, David. Great to be here. Great to be talking to you again, and we appreciate the support as ever.
Yeah, I really love this book. I was really excited to get an ARC and be able to read it early. It's really fun, but before we get to No Second Chances, and we are going to talk about it, I do want to talk about the comic book work that you're doing. As I was able to read your the first volume of the collected Sleeping Beauties, which you got to adapt a pretty big name here, or two names in the novel Sleeping Beauties by Stephen and Owen King. How did this project come together?
Well, I've known Chris Ryle, who San Diego guy.
Yeah.
Great guy. I've known him for, I want to say 10 years probably. I met him at a convention down in Austin, and we hit it off. And it was always obvious that we were gonna put our heads together and work together on something. It just had to be the right project. And I did a one-shot like zombies versus robot thing with him, which was great because it got me to sort of it sort of introduced me to writing comic scripts, and it wasn't a great deal of pressure on me because I knew I had Chris in my corner who would certainly help me along if I was going astray. So that was a nice little intro into comics, and yeah, it was clear we were going to do something together. We banded around a few ideas over the years, and we came close on a few things. He approached me to do an X-Files comic. When IDW were doing that, I was on the short list. It was me and two other writers. We pitched our ideas, and it, like I said, it was me, two other guys, and they chose one of the other guys, which at the time I was like, oh man, I would love to have written the X-Files comics. That would have been awesome. And I had this really great idea as well for this comic book series. And it stung a little not getting that gig, but it was the best thing really, because that was a long series that ended up at IDW, and that would have tied me up for a long time. And the really good thing was that one of the ideas I had for the X-Files comic was about this young girl who had the ability to steal memories from someone's mind. And I always thought that was too good an idea to let slip. And I actually developed that idea, and it became the novel The Forgotten Girl, which is
I'm a huge fan of.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and as am I. It's actually one of my favorite of my novels, and that was the book that kind of led me on this. I would say, that was the book that was bought, the first book I sold outside of the small presses. So the first book that sold to a major New York publisher. So every cloud has a silver lining, right?
Right.
And then we were going to do something. Then Chris and I were going to do. This is quite a long answer, so hold.
No, take your time. We have it.
Chris and I were going to do a comic book together called Derry. I think it was called Derry or something like that. But it was set in Derry, Maine, Stephen King's Derry, Maine, and we were going to use multiple Stephen King characters, and it was all going through all of the King's legal department and his lawyers and so on. So it looked for a long time like it was going to happen. And I was obviously stoked to do that. And then it just kind of fell through. And that happens from time to time. Projects look like they've got legs, and then the legs just collapse out from under them. And it wasn't too long after that TV show, I think it was called the Castle Rock TV show that JJ, yeah, that came out. And it was a very similar idea. And I always wondered if our idea was kind of,
More
just pushed
yeah,
because it was a bit close to the other one, the Castle Rock TV show. We'll never know that, but yeah. And then so we stayed in touch. We had all these ideas, and then he emailed me out of the blue one day and said, "Hey, I've been talking to Owen, who I also know. Owen's a big fan, and he's a big fan of my novel Westlake Soul, and we'd always talked about working together, Owen and I." And he said, I was talking to Owen, and we really want to do a Sleeping Beauties comic. Is that something you might be interested in? And I was like, yeah, hell yeah, for sure. Well, let's do it. He said, I've mentioned your name to Owen, and he's, you guys are friends, so it was something that we can definitely put together. We obviously got to go through all of the, the legal stuff with, the King property and his lawyers, but it looks like this one's going to happen. And even then, there was a part of me thinking, it ain't going to happen. Like,
right.
What are the chances of this thing finally sort of taking off? And it took a while. Like, it probably was 18 months from that initial email from Chris Ryle to getting the green light and everything being squared away with the lawyers. And yeah.
Was the novel out, and had you read it yet? Or because I know sometimes these things happen.
Yeah, no, it was out. It had just, I just finished reading it actually when, maybe like 3 weeks before or whatever it was when Chris emailed me. So it was very fresh in my head. So I waited until I got the green light before I sat down to read it again. Mm-hmm. I was initially told that it was going to be 18 issues, and I thought there were 22-page issues. And I thought, okay, this is great because I've got 18 times 22 pages here to tell this story, because it's a 700-page novel. It's a huge book.
Yeah.
And I knew I'd have to make some cuts, quite a few cuts. And then once the contract was signed and everything had been squared away, I found out that it was actually 10 issues and that they would be 20 pages each issue. So, it was virtually halved how much room I had to work in. And that frightened me a little bit because I didn't want to lose too much of the story. Mm. The whole point of adapting something is that you tell the story that was originally told. But I thought, what the hell, man, I've got to give this a go. So yeah, we did it. We put it together, and it was a great experience.
Now, Owen has let slip in the media that they wrote it as a teleplay first. That they originally did that. Did you get access to that at all to help with the process, or did you go strictly did you adapt strictly from the novel?
Yeah, from the novel. I didn't get access to any of the earlier teleplay stuff. No, it was, no, I didn't get any special favors. It was just go read the book and then do your best. Yeah, that was it. I did,
And and drilling down 700 pages to this is no small feat. So I
think it would be a challenge for anybody if they're even if they're skilled and experienced adapting anything. This was really, I did that, like I said, that Zombies versus Robots 12-pager for Chris Ryle back in the day. But this was really my first comic, and for it to be my first comic is still an undertaking, but for it to be an adaptation on top, and then for me to have to really streamline the book and turn it into something, worthy of the King name, there was a lot of pressure, So I made sure that I ran everything by the Kings and Chris, obviously having him in my corner at the time, just to make sure that it was. I wasn't going to upset anybody and that they were on board. So I had this whole breakdown. I went through the book. I wrote down what happened in every chapter, And then I broke it down like, okay, what do I need? What do I need to tell this story? What can go? And I had to make some pretty tough cuts. There's some fantastic scenes in the book that I really wanted to include, but I just didn't have the room, So I had to cut them out, and that was tough. But on the whole, we've got the story, and we've got the characters, and we got lots of action, and the artwork by Allison and Trina is second to none, and it's a project I'm very proud of.
Yeah, the artwork is incredible. We'll get back to that, but I want to talk about adapting a little bit more, because we like to nerd out on writing on this podcast. And
cool. Good.
So one of the things that I'm curious about is, you read this book already. You already had an experience just reading it, and just reading it's a totally different experience from going back and taking notes and doing all that. How different did you view the story after like living in it, not having written it yet, but just reading it as I got to think about this more deeply? Because I'm sure it kind of changed, right, in your head a little bit.
Yeah, you start looking for, fundamentally, I was looking for things that I didn't really need, or that I could do. I kind of read it more with like an editor's eye, I suppose, even though I'm not an editor and I have no skill as an editor, and like my own stuff, and that doesn't really count.
Right.
So it was a different, it was definitely a different experience. But there's a lot of stuff in this book that doesn't necessarily pertain to story, but that does pertain to character, and character drives story. So even things that were not, you could think, I can probably do away with that, you still felt that you were losing something vital to what made Sleeping Beauties the novel that makes it the novel that it is. And it was very, it was a very careful process, a very considered and respectful process. And reading it, I was looking for stuff that I could cut, and obviously I was finding stuff, but not without cost. I enjoyed it as much second time through, because I really developed a kinship with characters that I knew myself I would be spending a lot of time with. And that happened, during the writing of the script. Clint and Lila and Terry and all of these great characters from the book, they became my characters. And I was giving them new lines of dialogue, and we were directing them in a slightly different way. But I'd sort of become adopted parent at this point from the two kings, and I treated them as I would treat any of my own characters.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and Sleeping Beauties was interesting because when I read it, there were some really great setups and payoffs in it, to the degree that I remember I have a very distinct memory of reading one of those setup and payoffs while I was on a commute to work, and having the thought, there's no way this wasn't outlined. There's no way this wasn't planned. This is not a seat of the pants thing. And so I felt very vindicated when I read that Owen said they had written it as a script before. So so I don't think this was quite as seat of the pants as the Kings tend to write. It's those setups and payoffs in the story of Sleeping Beauties just play so well with the concept of the particular pandemic that it's writing about. And it makes for interesting stuff. So but I guess I don't know, I'm babbling here, but I'm just saying that I really appreciated, I think it's one of the better collaborations that Steve has had with his sons, and he's done a couple now. And I was really glad to see you translate it. And one of the things that I was really glad to see too, a little bit, is it gave you a chance you could shorthand a lot of the story by being able to use visuals, and that comes down to the art. So it must have been a great feeling to see how powerful the art turned out, because it looks great. So
Absolutely, yeah. Allison's fantastic. She you know, all of her characters are they're modeled on real people. And she photographs of friends. Interestingly, one of the characters in the second issue is Chris Hemsworth's stunt double. Yeah, his name's Bobby Dazzler, and he's just
that's a great name.
Yeah, I don't think it's his real name, but it's his stage name. He's one of Chris Hemsworth's big buddies, and I guess he knows Allison as well. And yeah, that's that's my 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon's story to, you know, that links me to Chris Hemsworth. But yeah, so she uses real people, and that obviously gives them a real look. You know, it is a comic book, but they look like real people living real lives, and everything is modeled on realism, and I love that. But there's a surrealism to it as well. Mm-hmm. That, you know, the juxtaposition between these two elements makes for a truly magical art style. And when you add Trina Farrell's colors, which are, you know, again, surreal and beautiful, gorgeous, very appealing. You know, you can flip through the book and, you know, these colors just bounce off the page. You know, the whole thing, the aesthetic of the whole thing is incredibly pleasing. The only thing I'm not a big fan of is the black speech balloons. But that was a decision that was made way up the IDW ladder that I didn't get to be a part of. But other than that, you know, visually, this is, I think, one of the most visually pleasing comic books I've ever seen. The artwork's phenomenal. Watching it come in as well was such a delight. That's actually my favorite part of the whole comic writing process. It's seeing the artwork, and I'm experiencing that now with Refrigerator Full of Heads. The great Tom Fowler doing the artwork for that, and just seeing it come in is just a real treat. You know, it's great.
Yeah, we'll talk about that one in a minute. Now here's the thing. Like, we all know a lot of our favorite, like, being in this community, we know a lot of our favorite authors personally, and we're good friends with them. And so some of that stuff kind of wears off, but Stephen King is a whole different thing. You know, the foundational level that he kind of plays in all of our lives who read this genre, and how much we've read him, and how important he is to the community, and the saturation into pop culture that he's had. It makes it a totally different thing. So I'm sure it had to be totally nerve-wracking. Did you send a script to him before, or what kind of, you know, did you just get feedback when it was done, or, like, you know?
I sent to Steve, basically my outline for all 10 issues. Mm-hmm. So I knew before I even sat down to write issue 1 exactly what was going to happen scene by scene in every comic book through all 10. And yeah, it was, you know, I just broke it all down, and I put it on however many pages of you know, and send it off to Owen, Chris Ryall, to Steve King. And I said, this is what I propose. I think we tell the story well. We'll get a great sense of character, and, you know, give me feedback here. Because again, you know, new to comics, not really knowing what the hell I was doing, very nervous, didn't want to upset anybody. And I expected pages and pages of notes. And what I got back from Chris Ryall was, this is excellent, just proceed. So yeah, the Kings gave it the go ahead. As for the actual script by script feedback, Steve took a back seat on that, and Owen jumped up into the passenger seat, and he read everything. He read all of the scripts. Steve trusted him to make the right calls, and he did. And yeah, we, you know, got feedback from Owen, and yeah, so Steve wasn't involved a great deal once we started rolling, but
he's a busy guy.
Yeah, you know, he's got a lot going on, and I wasn't expecting him to be. But certainly those beginning stages, we'd exchanged a few emails, and there were a few things as well with transgenderism that we definitely were keen to include in the book, in the comic book. And we wanted to make sure that we did it right, and that we did it in a way that was representative. And again, having Allison and Trina on board, I did my part in the writing, and just what Allison did with the artwork and Trina did with the colors really added so much flavor to the story we were trying to tell. And tonally, thematically, it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful book.
Yeah, and if I'm being honest, like the one problem that I kind of had with Sleeping Beauties was there's one scene where it felt a little outdated when some of the characters were like, well, who's gonna do the dishes, now, and all that stuff. And I thought that just personally, I thought you handled that so much better in the in the graphic novel, because I that was something that I was very thankful for, because that was the one kind of problem I had with Sleeping Beauties, is that you kind of, no offense to half of this writing team, but you could kind of tell the generational difference in some of that writing.
Right.
And
thanks a lot.
Yeah. And so that was kind of important. And but you've continued to work with the family now with a refrigerator full of heads, which, so how did that happen? Like, how did that come about? Like, because Joe launched his own line of comics, or a label of DC, right? Is that
Hill House Comics? So he's got his own imprint at the under the Black Label banner at DC. And yeah, there were I think 5 comics in that original line. Joe did 2. He did Basketball of Heads and Plunge. It was the Dollhouse family. So there were a few very successful comics, and and I've known Joe for years as well. He's been a big champion of my work. Great guy, such a great guy, and we're fans of each other's work, obviously. And then he just emailed me out of the blue and said, "We're putting Hill House back together, and we'd love you to write a script if you're interested." He says, "I got an idea, and let's get together on the phone and talk about it." So we did. Mm-hmm. And it was and then it became very collaborative in terms of Joe fielding ideas, me fielding ideas, Joe taking that, running with it, adding to it, me taking what Joe added to, and just back and forth. Mm-hmm. And then I remember our first telephone conversation, and the creative energy on that call was, I'd never experienced anything like it. It was amazing. It was just great. And clearly we were both on the same page as to what we wanted. I hadn't read Basketful of Heads, but I'd heard about it. And when Joe said, it would be great if maybe we could do the sequel to that, I was so, because I loved the concept of Basketful of Heads, this cursed Viking axe. Mm. When you remove someone's head, the body dies, but the head stays alive. And I thought, Jesus, man, what a cool idea. I wish I'd thought of that. And then it turns out I'm writing the sequel to it. It's just so much creative energy. And then Joe said, well, let's put a pitch together, and I wrote a pitch, and and then Joe added some things, and then and we sent it in, and then the editor at the time added some things. It looked like it was all going to go ahead, and then they had a big reshuffle at DC, and some people were laid off and other people moved on, and the project died for about 6 months. It looked like it wasn't going to happen. Again, this happens a lot in film and TV and comics and everything, where it looks like something's just about to get the green light, and then suddenly hit the brakes. And I kind of forgot about it. It went off the radar. And again, Joe emailed me, said, they've got a new editor at DC, and we're going to get this thing going again. You still interested? And I said, yeah, I am interested. And I've been thinking about that initial pitch, and I'd like to have another run at it. Because in those 6 months, I'd been thinking. And I threw this wild pitch at Joe. and he loved it. And again, you know, Joe added a few things in, and we at the pitch I delivered to DC. I knew as soon as I sent it in, there's no way this is getting turned down. This is too good. This is too much fun. And sure enough, it was greenlit almost right away. But that process with Joe, like that creative going back and forth with ideas and each feeding off the other was pretty special. Yeah, I'd never experienced anything like that. And you know, I got lots of writer friends and we talk ideas and stuff and all the time. And it's great and it's fun. But there was something pretty electric in those conversations I had with Joe. It was a special time.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of collaborating. If you can find the right project and the right thing to do, because I love that process of sharing ideas and not feeling alone on things. And there's a certain joy to writing by yourself too, and being totally in charge of something. But if you can find the right people to work with, it can be really great. But speaking of a project that's all your own, and let's stay with the King family for just a little bit more, because I didn't know this book was on the way. I think I might have already. I think you'd already talked about it. But it was a big deal when King blurbed it. Like, so he has blurbed your work before or talked about your work before, I believe, but still, like, getting that kind of validation for this book right out of the gate, it's got to be a great feeling. For
Yeah, I was
No Second Chances, which is the book we're talking about, and I didn't mention it by name.
Yeah. No Second Chances. Yeah, new book. It's out February from William Morrow. No, this was the first time that King had, I think maybe the first time he'd actually read one of my novels. Certainly the first time he publicly endorsed anything of mine. And yeah, it was good. It was nice. It was a really good blurb and very grateful. Yeah, and I hope it helps the book get noticed.
Oh, I'm sure it will. There's a lot of us. I mean, like, if King talks about a book, I'm gonna pay attention. Like, a lot of times, for me, like, one of the ones that I can remember, like End of the World Running Club, like, was just a book that was just absolutely not on my radar. And like, the minute he's talked about it, I put it on hold at the library, read it, loved it. And so, like, I do think that cosign is it's still very, very, very important. And so anyway, so No Second Chances, like, you're coming off Lola on Fire, and if people aren't familiar with Lola on Fire, we talked about it on this podcast. So yeah. I recommend that they go back and listen to that conversation too, because I've got more into your origin story in that one. But Lola on Fire, one of the cool things that happened recently is that there's a film critic I really respect, Jacob Hall, who writes for Slash Film, and he discovered Lola on Fire recently. He did a reading vacation, and on their podcast, he talked on and on and on about how great Lola on Fire was, how, one day we'll see a movie of it, and you'll remember I told you to read this book. And right. It was really cool to hear him talk about Lola on Fire in that way. But
I had no idea about that, so thanks for telling me. That's great. It's good to know.
Yeah. And Jacob's one of the film critics that I really, really respect. I've been on his podcast, and he's been on mine, and I really respect he's really he was on a Nick Cutter kick and read Lola on Fire right after reading like 3 Nick Cutter books in a row. And it was really cool to hear, because for me, like, Lola on Fire was it was just cool to hear somebody else get it the way that I, somebody outside of our literary community, and just say, like, and was saying, like, a lot of the right things about what Lola on Fire was. And what was cool about Lola on Fire is that it really felt like, and I know you wanted this, is it felt like an action movie in book form, right? And where do you go from there? What do you do from there? Like, what was your process of thinking, like, what's the next book, and how did No Second Chances come out of, moving on from Lola on Fire as your project?
Yeah, I wanted to write another action movie in book form. That was 100% the motive for that. I I always thought that the second book would be another Lola book. That was what I thought I was going to write. And when it came to sort of, putting ideas together, I didn't really have anything that would do the character, that would give her the platform that I felt Lola needed. The thing with Lola on Fire is it's really not about Lola there, really. It's about Brody and Molly. It's their story, and Lola is actually a secondary character, and she comes in. She's there right at the beginning, and then she comes in about halfway through. But it was never intended to be Lola's story as such. And I always wanted to write a book where it was Lola's story, and whether that was going to be a kind of prequel book or whether it was going to be, after the events of Lola on Fire, I wasn't sure. But that was kind of the intention. But like I said, I didn't really have anything that I felt would do her justice and please the readers and the fans of the first book. What I did have in my head were these two characters that had sort of been living in my skull for probably the best part of 2 or 3 years. Luke Kingsley, who's a washed up, has-been actor falling on hard times after everybody believes, he killed his wife. And Kitty Ray, who's this wannabe starlet who's moved from the East Coast, or Kentucky, as it turns out, to LA to chase her dreams, and bringing these two characters together, both from very different walks of life, and making some kind of magic happen between them. I didn't really have anything in the way of an idea or some sort of plot-driven, story for these guys, but it was I just knew that I had to do something. I also, every book I've written, pretty much, I think, has been set in the Northeast, or certainly along the East Coast of the United States, or in Canada. The Forgotten Girl was Jersey, although Harvey does take off and does travel across the country. Halcyon was Lake Ontario, and yeah, I just wanted to write a book and set it in California. I wanted palm trees and sunshine. Because when I write a book, I live in the book, right? I kind of just felt like living in California for a year, even if it was only in my own head. And I really wanted to spend time with these characters. And it was really only when I didn't know how they would work together, but it was when I got the idea for Johan, this YouTube sensation, wannabe Viking and drug dealer to the stars. When he entered the equation, then I saw how the pieces would go together. I saw one guy who was perhaps, wrongly vilified, and I saw this other guy who was perhaps wrongly celebrated. And for this new, for a kiddie new to the city, looking for some kind of influence, looking for a friend, for a shoulder, which route would she end up taking, and just as soon as that happened, everything else seemed to fall into place, and no second chances came into being, and it was, yeah. And I knew also that I had to have those action movie elements, and I love doing that stuff, the car chases, and I remember I read somewhere, it was like one of these writers group tips or like whatever they call them, like just advice, and they said never write a car chase into your action sequences. And my reaction to that was, well, fuck you, buddy. And I put 2 in The Forgotten Girl. I love writing anything action. I will do it, and you can write car chases, why can't you? Yeah. So I put 2 in The Forgotten Girl, and there's a big car chase in there's a car chase in Lola on Fire. I wanted to go all out of Hollywood on this. There's a big car chase in No Second Chances, and it's just so much fun. I have fun when I write, so I'll do what I want. Thank you.
Well, you know what's really interesting though is that you do great action scenes and they are fun parts of it. But even whether it's Lola on Fire or No Second Chances, a lot of times, like the thing that sticks with you after you close the book and you're thinking about the book later are the characters. And I think that that's your secret weapon is that the characters are so rich in here, and specifically Luke and Johan are like a great reversal of each other in
Right.
so many ways, and that's one of the things that makes it strong. And I know King in his blurb really like pointed to Johan as a strong villain, and I want to drill down on that when we get into spoilers. But I think that's for spoilers.
Right.
I think it's important to tell people that's one of the things that makes this book what it is. Like to me, it's the rich characters, and when you see something that says LA Noir, and it's funny because I know in my review, well, King said in his blurb that it was like a Hollywood noir, and I know I kind of nitpick that a little bit because I feel like it's a Southern California noir because so much of this book has the desert as a character in this book as well. And I don't know, it's just the use of the word Hollywood, it kind of rings that works better for people that don't live in California or haven't
Right. Yeah.
experienced LA, because Hollywood just to us it's just a tiny neighborhood in the city. And for example, your characters live in John Skip's old hood in Silver Lake,
Right.
which is a very different part of town, right?
Yeah.
From Hollywood. And the fact that they're in Silver Lake is important to the story.
Right.
For that reason. But the City of Broken Dreams aspect of it is important to Luke. It's important to Kitty in the story. And the fact that there are no broken dreams for their villain is one of the really smart narrative choices that's going on here. And
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. And so before we really get into the plot, into the spoilers, what I would tell people is the vibe. Like a lot of times, like it was funny because with Lola on Fire, I kept saying the vibe kind of reminded me of the best Luc Besson action movies, you know. And here I got a real Tony Scott True Romance vibe in a way. Not Quentin Tarantino True Romance, but Tony Scott.
Right.
In specific, is it kind of felt like a lost Tony Scott movie to me.
Oh, cool. That's great.
Yeah, and that's like a huge part of the vibe that I got. It's a crime story, it's a thriller, it's an action story, but it's character based. So I don't know how you feel about that comparison. I don't.
But that's my jam. That's what I do. That's what I want to kind of be. If I'm remembered for anything, it would be, you know, someone who writes great, you know, plot driven stories, but that actually have some substance and some character. Tried to do that in Lola on Fire. I've tried to do that with every book I've written. So many thrillers are sort of paint by numbers, you know, and
yeah,
there's not really a lot of, you know, it's all, you know, hard boiled, you know, heroes, and you know, I think I want to just be able to do better than that as a novelist. And yeah, you know, the Hollywood thing. I mean, it is. You're right. It's definitely the whole of Los Angeles feels like the character in this book, not just the Hollywood. It does have that backdrop of the movie industry, you know, with Luke being this actor whose career was certainly on the rise when everything went south for him, and you know his want to be exonerated, but also his desire to get back into movies. Kitty as well, you know, that's why she's there. She wants to, you know, get a big break. Johan, like I said, he's this drug dealer to the stars. So although, you know, it's a very small portion of the book actually takes place in the neighborhood of Hollywood, you know, that Hollywood sign kind of looms in the background of many of the scenes. And then eventually we sort of veer off into the desert, and we actually cross the state line into Nevada at a later point in the book. We'll get to that.
I should be clear that 98% of the world is not going to have a problem with calling it Hollywood noir, and they're going to feel that way. that's just
I don't have a problem with it.
yeah, yeah.
If Stephen King says it, I'm very cool with it.
It's just I just think the Southern Californian in me, like I think so much of the rest of LA is an important part of the story, and
I agree. And that was always
the
the
me
intention.
thing. It's don't worry about that.
No, that was always the intention, and it's good to hear that. I'm not a California native, and while I did visit Los Angeles, and while I did, research and try to develop as much of a taste and as much of a feel for the lifestyle as I could in the short time I was there, I knew I wasn't going to really be able to hit it on the head, and that anybody who lives in California would probably find something that I did wrong, or someplace where I kind of went wrong. But again, I go back to my good buddy Chris Royal, who is a California native,
Yeah,
who knows Los Angeles. Seems everybody from San Diego knows Los Angeles really well.
we have to go up there a lot,
Yeah. So Chris really knows Los Angeles. He knows the whole neighborhood, and he was my first reader. And I said, dude, listen, I want this to sound authentic. I want this to sound like it was written by a Californian. So any way you can help me out. He was great.
No, and really, like there's nothing I'm calling bullshit on.
Cool.
That was a little nitpick on the blurb, not the book.
I get it. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and I think it did feel like, and just like picking really, like for example, Silver Lake as a neighborhood that the has-been actor and the wannabe actor are more likely to be in than some other neighborhoods, like setting it in Santa Monica or something, like those are clear and smart choices. And so that's good. And before we get into spoilers, and the last like pitch that we would make to people who have not gotten the book yet or are on the fence about reading it, I really do think that kind of true romance vibe is a lot of how I kind of sell it to people, and it's got kind of the weird crime thing, but I think the rich characters is what I think is the to me it's a character driven noir, and that's how I sell it. So,
and that's fantastic. Thanks. And I like the true romance vibe as well. That's a great movie. I think that's a character driven sort of crime thriller as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Forget the name of the characters, but you've got Christian Slater's character who kind of sees Elvis at every turn, and it's Gary Oldman's character, the drug dealer with the dreadlocks. I love all that, and I thought it was
that's kind of the characters, and the way that the characters kind of push through is why why I thought of true romance anyways. So
that's great. That's a good comparison, and I'm grateful for you for calling that out. It's great.
All right, so let's get into spoilers. So everyone's warned that we're gonna talk details here.
Yeah.
Now, so much of the story is set up. Like now, at this point, we're assuming everyone's read it. So if you've listened this far, you're doing yourself a disservice if you have not read it. So last warning, because we're going to talk about the characters in whole. So let's start with Kitty. Oh, no. Let's start with Luke, because Luke's the one that's got more of a spoilery story. Kitty's out there trying to do the Hollywood dream, that kind of thing, and lives across the street from Luke, who's this failed actor. And so much and the reason why is because he was basically canceled because he woke up with blood all over him, and his famous wife, who's a singer, disappeared. And he knows that he didn't kill her, but the reader and the world really doesn't in the beginning. How much was important to kind of add some ambiguity to Luke in the beginning? Because I wasn't sure if he had done it or not in the early pages. And one of the most important scenes is when he really after when he tries to commit suicide. That makes you think, oh, well, he must feel guilty, or it's because his life is lost. Like, tell me about developing Luke and that ambiguity.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the words you used there was failed actor, and I guess he is. I guess that is accurate. But like, I'd always thought of him as a successful actor who, so many people want to be, stars, move to Hollywood, and they don't get anything. They don't even get an audition.
It's
Um,
true. It's
and
true.
Luke had gone. He was making movies. He was making movies with Travolta, and he was in a good place. He had the house up in Sherman Oaks. Life was good. He was married to Lisa Hayes, Grammy-winning soul singer. So he had success, but then it all came crashing down after his wife went missing, and he woke up with blood all over his shirt, her blood, as it turns out. And the ambiguity was important because in regard to Kitty, we want to be as the reader. I think I wanted the reader to be
Nervous.
very wary,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
make sure you make the right decision here. So like I said, you've got these two characters. You've got Johan, who shines and everything he touches turns to gold, and you've got Luke, whose world has turned to shit. And
And
yeah,
Johan's
so
getting all this for doing nothing, for just basically accomplishing nothing. And Luke was a hardworking actor, and it
yeah,
all fell apart. So there, that great reversal on each other, or flip side, for each other, and it's one of the things that makes him like a really great. And I said this to my coworker who's reading the book, who I passed on to. As I said, the thing with Johan that makes him such a great villain is that in a story about the city of broken dreams, he's living the dreams for doing nothing. Like,
that's
he's
right.
just basically handed it to him. And so one of the important things for him as a villain is all the times that he says, my dad's lawyers are going to have a heyday with this. It's the thing that makes him such a perfect prick for for a
Yeah,
Hollywood noir. So
yeah. He feels he's untouchable, and he probably is. He's just a son of a billionaire, and all of his success has come out of the fact that he's never had to want for anything. He's always had money. He's always been able to do whatever he's wanted. It's got him into big places, and yeah, he's a YouTuber, but he doesn't really work-wise do too much more than that. Everything's been handed to him. Whereas Luke, he moved from Wisconsin to Hollywood, and he's had to scratch and claw for everything. And as we're into spoilers, his world comes crashing down for no reason whatsoever. It turns out that he didn't kill his wife, and he's facing the vitriol of the general public and social media and the media, and
he
he's
knows he's
struggling.
not guilty, but he can't say, well, to a degree. Well, I mean, he was kind of blacked out, so that there is a degree that he could be questioning himself as well. But he knows he loved Lisa and that he didn't.
Yeah, ultimately he knows he didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't do it. It's just how do you prove
How do
this
you
to a
prove
world
it?
that believes he did? And he says to his buddy in the old soul guy in the bar at the beginning, the Melody Bar and Grill, which is a real place in Los Angeles. It's a real bar. It's a great place. And he says, Floyd, right? He says to him, he says to Kitty, I didn't do it. And Floyd's there to help him out and help him through that very difficult time. But the reader still doesn't know whether what Luke tells Kitty is the truth. I didn't do it. Of course, he's going to say that OJ said that. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, a part of the first act is everyone being like, oh, lady, come on,
Right.
don't trust that guy. And that's important. It's an important part of the story, because that makes an arc for both Kitty and for Luke, is that they kind of have an arc together where she starts to trust him, we start to trust him, and then we get to that point in the story. And it's one of the things that progresses this story so well.
Yeah,
So
she quickly begins to trust the guy that everybody's telling her not to trust, and yet she quickly, very rapidly loses trust in the well, she's very wary of Johan to begin with, but she starts, he beguiles her, and he lures her and tempts her in, like any great bad guy. And
yeah,
and then she sees that that's a mistake. Her instincts on both counts were all wrong. And that's really, like, it's the first sort of, it sets up the second half of the book,
yeah.
where
And I want to talk about that transition because it was a really smart and brilliant transition. But one more thing about Luke and Kitty's relationship is that
yeah,
it's so important that there's nothing sexual between them. It's so
right,
important because there a lot of storytellers in the past would probably have developed that. But for one thing, it's important that since we're in spoilers, that once Luke finds Lisa, that there's no tension there. And also just because it's one of the things that tells us that Luke is a good guy and that he's not out to exploit this woman that wants this career, whatever.
yeah,
And also, like, I just think it's important for Kitty's character that she doesn't see him that way, that she's not trying to get a career out of him either, because a lot of people in LA, they carry their headshots on them, and
yeah,
they're looking for any opportunity, like, oh, I could turn this into a thing. There are people, men and women who would do that in LA. So it's so important that there's nothing sexual between those two characters. And I'm sure that was an early decision on your part as a storyteller, right?
yeah. That was never even a question.
Yeah.
Really in my head, it was, I wanted to have Luke be this character who was wholly despised, but who essentially was wholly good. That included obviously not taking any kind of advantage of Kitty, who's young, and she's arrived in Los Angeles. She doesn't know anybody. I mean, there was never a question that Luke was always going to do the right thing, and then it stings even more that he is vilified in the way that he is. So yeah, there was, I couldn't. It would have all been, like you said,
Yeah.
like when he sees Lisa, it would just have all been very messy, and no, it was very important to me that Luke was seen as, once we get to know him, as a wholly good guy, and even the advice he gives Kitty about the movie industry, and because at one point Kitty says to him, "I'll do whatever it takes," and he says something like, "Just be careful who you share that willingness with. There are a lot of people out there who will take advantage of you," and he's not one of them. He's just a good guy.
And unfortunately, she does fall into that trap with Johan, and selling Canary, this kind of performance enhancing drug that exists in the book. And the reveal of the kind of the what's the box scene, with which is great, because what it really does is, it's such a hard transition from where the novel was to where the novel's going. And so I really liked that it was kind of like, and this is kind of a bad metaphor because of what's going on in the novel with Johan and the fake Viking stuff, but it's kind of like the battle axe is dropped and then in that scene, and then it changes the whole book. And it's really well described. Her, the way I liked drawing everything inside her chest into a hard frosty ball. Like, it's just a very rich scene. It's a great transition. So you talk about how you thought of Johan kind of revealing himself to be evil in this scene, because we knew it's coming. We can see that he's a bad guy. We see the train wreck coming, but this reveal was so important. So can you talk about this scene?
Yeah, it was that scene is it's kind of like this is what propels the rest of the book. This is the Kitty at this point. She's new. She has been new to the city. She doesn't really know anybody. She's going from sort of trusting no one to, at this point in the book, she trusts everyone. So she's just settled in. She feels that her life is taken off. She's got this job. Johan seems to be this, almost magical guy. He's got celebrity connections. She's established something of a relationship with Luke, although she's still obviously a bit uncertain about him. But so you want that scene to be like a kick in the stomach, right? Like that moment where you finally pull back the shower curtain and there's the creature standing there with the guy with the knife in his hands, and you're like, I knew that was there. I knew that guy was always going to be there. So, but he does it in a charming way. Look, he brings her a birthday present, and it's all wrapped up, and it's the wrapping is pretty, and there's nothing to suggest other than the reader's intuition that anything bad is going to happen in that scene. Kitty's certainly not expecting it. So I wanted it to feel like, we were going to shoot like the next part of this book out of a cannon. Like it had to have that kind of like kinetic energy to it. And it, I'm see the pants guy, right? So I didn't really know about that scene too far before I got to it. I knew that there were going to be issues with Sly Boy, and that he'd been dipping his fingers into Johan's product, and that Kitty would be on the receiving end of a lot of that angst. But I wasn't quite sure how I'd get to that point, and I sat down and worked it all out, and that felt like a time bomb, right? That had been ticking, and this was the point where it explodes, and Kitty realizes then that she's made a choice that's going to cost her a life, effectively. It went well. Like the scene went well. The writing of the scene, I think Johan is just the way he presents himself in that scene. Never loses control. He's always cool. He's eloquent. He's still giving off this persona of being, incredibly charming and gifted, and nothing he could do would have any consequence. He's entirely confident.
Now, you see the Panthers. I don't know how you do it. And being an outliner myself, being a serious outliner, because I don't know how. So that's the thing, is that after this, Luke and Kitty, like when Kitty survives, and that's great action scene with her hiding in the basically the engine shaft of the car and getting out, great action. Then there's some great character stuff with Luke being able to use his connections to a makeup effects artist, and kind of to pretend to be a cop and show her as being dead. Like, I don't know, you had to have had that idea ahead of time, right? That was coming, right? You knew that at least.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
That was one of the few scenes that I kind of the book was leading up to, right? That scene where they fake Kitty's death, and I like that idea. That was one of the things, when I talked about having this, Luke, these characters in my mind, there was that sort of scene, like, that's got something to do with it, and it felt really, there were two scenes that actually felt that I was kind of, well, maybe three. Luke waking up with the blood on his shirt, the scene where they fake Kitty's death, and the other really important scene. It feels really weird talking about this because this is so spoilery, all this stuff. But where he finally finds Lisa, and then of course Johan descends as chaos.
Yeah.
And Luke, at some point, Johan takes Kitty off. Lisa goes off with Jesus Christ, my memory, I can't even remember the guy's name, Ramon, right?
Yeah.
In the other direction. And now Luke has to choose whether or not he goes after his wife or whether he goes after his friend. And because you can only follow one of them. I knew I wanted that scene, and I didn't know how the hell I was going to get there.
Yeah, and that decision is heartbreaking in that moment, and like after everything that had happened to him, yeah, it's great,
Yeah,
great,
yeah,
powerful stuff. And you got ahead of me because I had that
right.
that
Sorry, yeah.
decision on my list of things that I wanted to talk about, and um, been
Well, that's
building towards.
panting, right? That's the thing. You know, you talk about seeing the pants, and I am, but oftentimes you have these things in your head that you've got waypoints that you have to hit. It's
Yeah,
just getting to them. You know this has got to happen. You just don't quite know how you're going to get there.
yeah. Well,
So
the same thing with when you outline, like moments happen you're not prepared for. When you're outlining too, you have moments of invention where you're like, and oftentimes it means like I got to go back and change the outline because everything's changed now.
right,
Um,
yeah,
and that's one of the things is it's fluid too. So, um, but yeah, I mean, but it's obvious you're getting to and that point, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But once they fake the death, and Johan is kind of following them, there's also the character, and I can't remember her name, the cop who,
Tara, yeah,
yeah, who is a very important character. And it's interesting the way you broke up the narrative is that you give her POV chapters even though she's in the story a little bit less, but it's important because we get to see behind her decision that she really believes Luke is guilty and she's looking for justice. So she means well because she believes in her heart of hearts. And so it kind of creates a situation for us as readers that we want this woman to understand that she's wrong,
yeah,
but we don't dislike her. We she meant well, but we also want her to understand, hey, you were wrong. you
yeah,
know
yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, so she's a really interesting character. Can you talk about creating her, and like was she kind of a seat of the pants invention? um
Uh, Once the story started to fall into place, I knew I had to have another element that Luke and Kitty needed to deal with. A lot of the stuff with Tara was seat of the pants and did fall into place nicely.
yeah.
And I just knew that she'd be there at the end. Like Luke and Kitty couldn't take on Johan and Xander by themselves. They needed a bit of backup. So I knew that Tara was going to realize that she'd made a terrible mistake, and that she would come in at the end. But a lot of the stuff, like Xander and Luke finding the pictures of Kitty, the fake death pictures, and showing them to Tara, like I didn't have any of that. Like, that turns into quite an important scene, but that wasn't in my head at all until I knew I had to get Johan and Xander after Luke and Kitty, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. And so that all fell into place quite nicely with the pictures, with Xander finding the pictures, and then Tara being able to say, "I know exactly where they are. Where did you go get them?" Because she's been tracking Johan, Luke, of course. But Tara's character was interesting because she's a tough, intelligent, brilliant woman. This, had a hard life, grew up in Pennsylvania, fought Lola Bear at one point,
Yeah.
and then moves out to LA to be a cop and becomes a detective, and but a checkered career because she doesn't take any shit. Tara just she very compulsive, and
then if I'm hearing you correctly right there, and maybe I missed this connection, but so this is the wider Rio Youers universe kind of connecting right here, right? Is like making this is that this character, is that happening, or am I overthinking it?
there's always there's usually a link to something or other in my stories, I don't have enough readers that any of them are gonna, like form a whole great encyclopedia on the world of Rio Youers and how it's all connected, Castle Rock style. But yeah, I
Well, there
usually
was a
try to,
time where Stephen King was doing that in a vacuum too. So,
yeah, yeah.
maybe it'll come
It's
together.
a lot of it's for my own, satisfaction.
Right.
And astute readers, maybe all three of them will pick up on it. But yeah, Lola Bear is mentioned in No Second Chances because Tara, they're about the same age, these two women, and from similar backgrounds, essentially, just growing up tough. And yeah, their paths cross in a mixed martial arts tournament, and it's mentioned in passing, but it gives you a sense. If you've read Lola on Fire, it gives you a sense of the kind of cloth that Tara is cut from. And yeah, she's yeah, there's a little bit of the wider universe stuff there, but no one's really going to pick up on it, and it doesn't matter anyway.
Well, we
But
outed it, so it's
we know
there.
what it is. We know what it is.
So,
She was just I needed someone tough, and I needed someone who was going to hound Luke, and
and be able
yeah,
to be there at the end. Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
it was
No, it makes sense.
also not not so damaged that she wouldn't be able to realize when she was in the wrong and want to put things right. All Tara has ever wanted was justice. She wanted the right thing done. That's her entire motivation. And as soon as she realizes that she's made a mistake about Luke and that she was wrong about him, she goes beyond the call of duty to try and make everything right. And I think we go on a journey with Tara. We start off really not liking her very much, and then we sort of, grow to become quite fond of her. And yeah, it's
then she makes a rough choice.
Yeah, then she makes a rough choice. So yeah, she's as mixed up as everybody else in this book. Let's face it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Now, so we're getting towards the end here, and so finding Luke finding Lisa and the vindication, but the horror of how freaky the situation is, like, talk about writing that, because it was so important at that point for us that following Luke as a character that we wanted to see him vindicated. So there's a kind of revulsion and relief at the same time in those chapters, and I think that's a really interesting balance to kind of strike when you're telling that part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, obviously for the story to hold up, Lisa had to be in a situation where she really wasn't able to communicate with the outside world, that she wouldn't be found, and that she would have been mistreated by, as it transpires, Johann's drug manufacturer. And it was what I was hoping for with that scene where Luke finds her is I didn't want it to make it all about Luke and his career and him being exonerated and all of those things. I wanted it to be about Lisa and what she'd been through, and Luke being the good person he is, to be more fixated on how is he going to help her now? How is he going to find a way through it? First of all, let's get her out of this basement. First of all, let's get her the help she needs.
Yeah, you don't want him having the reaction of like, oh man, I got to call my agent.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
That barely even registers in him being exonerated. Barely even registers in his head. It's entirely
all about getting her to safety, and yeah.
But at the same time, we then have to reveal how she got into that position, which, so we go back to Luke waking up with the blood on his shirt, and how did that happen? And so there were two things at play with that scene, and one was obviously the reveal, and then two was making sure that Luke handled it in a way that sort of fit his character, and that didn't shine the wrong light on him. And yeah, again, you know, his motivation here is not, was never really to get his career back on track. You know, he had this tumultuous relationship with Lisa, very hot and cold, but they always loved one another. And he wants to find her, not for his career, but, you know, partly to be exonerated. Of course, he wouldn't want that, but mainly because he loves her and he's scared for her, and he kind of has this feeling that she's still out there, she's still alive. I mean, yeah. So there were just some delicate pieces to handle there.
Yeah, you know, and I gotta say too, well, we're thinking about the ending here. Johann, like when it comes to the end, his villainy isn't the only thing we're dealing with. We're dealing with like the whole kind of system of Ramon and like all that, the thing and where the drugs are coming from and all that. But cutting through here at the end, I want to point out that this is the second review in a row, Rio, where I commented on how good at writing villains Stephen King and Luc Besson are, and how you're in that category. So if I say it twice in a row, that means that now I have to put you in that pantheon of writing great bullies.
Thank you.
I believe you. It's been a while since I read The Forgotten Girl, but I remember Forgotten Girl had a really, really, really nasty villain in it too. So, so I think I have to officially put you in there in the writes great bullies category, because you do. and I think what's interesting that happens here at the end is that the horror of what's happened to Lisa and to all that is it's so balanced, that moment where even when he knows he's caught and he's doing all this, the Johann again references that daddy's lawyer, you know, he thinks he can get out of even this, right?
Yeah.
Even this dreadful, awful, like the kidnapping, the drugs, all of it is like my dad's lawyers, blah, blah, blah. And I think that that's why King in his blurb pointed out that the villainy here is so intense. And it's not just anyone saying that. It's one of the guys who I think is writes the two best bullies on the planet. So that's a pretty big deal that he's pointing out that the villainy of this character, that in the end of the day, writing this book, that has to be something that you feel really good about, is just how strong that villain comes off when it's all said and done. That being said, how do you reflect on this book now that it's over, especially as a pantser? Like, how different was the book from how you intended it to be?
It was the book I wanted to write. Certainly, yeah, I had this image in my head. You know, like I said, they didn't have everything. You know, it wasn't like joining the dots. There were very few dots on the page when I sat down. But you know, when you look back on it on the whole, the feel you were going for, the story you wanted to tell, the characters you wanted to create, feel like I feel like I did what I set out to do, that I achieved, and you know, all of my goals, and I checked all of the boxes, and yeah, just very pleased with it. Yeah, there were a few scenes that I thought would go in that ended up not going in, and but I hit those waypoints that I wanted to hit, and I think I did it in a convincing way. And one of the things I was most concerned about was getting the Hollywood vibe, you know, right, getting the California vibe right. And I say Hollywood in regard to the actors and the acting and the Hollywood. You know, there's a Hollywood party in the first part of the book. I think maybe a third of the way through, Johann takes Kitty to this big Hollywood bash, and I've never been to a Hollywood party. No one's ever invited me to, you know, to an actor up in Beverly Hills and the Hollywood Hills, and you know, partying with the superstars. That's so. Again, you know, that's me kind of just feeling my way through that. I think it's probably like this, and that
That's
was
when
one
you
of
have
the,
to rely on like the writers or the directors who are interested in your books. You got to take the advantage of those moments to ask them like what it's like, you know.
well, you
And
know, the way I see it is that probably 95% of my readers haven't been to Hollywood parties either, so they're not going to be able
that's
to call
true.
me out on it. But it was important, just the whole feel more than anything. And I think I did that. You're a California native, Chris Ryle, who read the
Oh,
first
I'm
one.
not a native. I've just lived here for a long
Oh, you're
time.
right. Yeah, of course. You come from Bloomington. We know that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. From
But
Indiana.
yeah, um, the guy, the fabulous voice actor and actor Jim Meskimen, who reads the audiobook version of No Second Chances. He also did such fantastic work with Lola on Fire. Um, he read the book. He obviously read it for the audiobook, and I would get emails during his reading process just saying how much he was enjoying it. He actually preferred it to Lola on Fire, which was very satisfying. And he said, "Dude, you got this Hollywood thing down. You just nailed it. You know, who are you talking to?" And he's an actor. He's a Hollywood guy. You
Yeah.
know, and it was I was like, oh, it's great. It's good to hear. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's always a good feeling. I had with Punk Rock Ghost Story. When I got a couple reviews that were like, this guy's obviously been on tour a million times, and
yeah.
like, and I'm like, no, a lot of friends who have been, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. It's good when it happens.
Yeah.
And that was really, obviously portraying the characters, not giving away too much about the story too early, hitting the reveals at the right point, getting the
Right.
Hollywood vibe, the LA vibe right, making everything feel believable. Those are the things I set out to write. So when I look back at the book now that it's finished, I see that like I said, I hit those waypoints and I check those boxes. I'm very, very happy with the way it turned out. Getting the King blurb is, it's an amazing, there's no real words, it's already made the book a success in my eyes. Nothing that
Right.
can happen. If the book sells 0 copies, the fact that I've got a blurb from Stephen King has made it worth
I mean,
reading, writing.
just to know that he sat down, read it, enjoyed it, it's got to be a great feeling. Like after all the hours, you've spent in your life reading his work, like it's that's a great feeling, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I just want to say as well, I do want to add that although I know his sons very well, Joe and Owen, there were no favors here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You don't go through Joe and Owen to get to their dad. That's not a thing that happens.
Yeah.
This was just the fact I think that Steve King wanted to sit down and read the book, and the fact that I've worked with Joe and Owen had no bearing on it whatsoever. So yeah, I earned this one, man. I earned it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's like one of the things, I think that's one of the reasons why like his blurb for End of the World Running Club meant a lot to me, because he just tweeted out, he just bought that book at the Toronto airport and said, I picked up this book on a flight from Toronto and read the whole thing on the fly, loved it. And I think the idea that, a lot of times people forget that King just, when he tweets out these things about these books, these days, a lot of times, if they're already on the cover, that's one thing, that maybe there's a publisher connection. But when he tweets them out, that that's just him in the moment. Like, I just read this and I want to talk about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it may end up on the cover of the book that way. But when you read the tweets, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That and especially like he's still got his ear to the ground. I mean, I'm sure he listens to Joe and Owen when they say,
I've
like,
lost
I
you,
like
David.
this
Can you hear me?
What? Yeah. I mean, I'm sure he has his ear to the ground. So I know, like, he probably listens to his sons when they say they like a writer, but, like, he's not going to, he talks about the stuff he likes. So it's great stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no favors there. It's yeah, and they're three very different men, three very different writers, and of course you're right. They do look at what each other read. But like I said, I've known Joe for God 10, 12 years probably, and Owen almost as long. And I think this is
Right.
the first time King's ever picked up one of my books. So good.
Yeah.
About bloody
Now,
time.
so just to wrap things up, because we're assuming that people listening at this point have already read No Second Chances, but and so I really appreciate that people have read this book. They're doing that, so they're going to get rewarded in this part where I'm going to ask you like what you're working on now, whether it's cover or whatever, and so we know that the people who made it this far have read the book, so they've earned getting a little treat.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Thank you for reading.
Even if it's just a vibe, even if you
Yeah.
can just tell us the vibe of what you're doing, like that would be cool. But you don't have to give us names because that may be early, obviously.
Yeah. I'm actually working on. I've got a few short stories that sort of piled up during the writing of No Second Chances, and then I jumped straight into the comic, the Refrigerator Full of Heads comic, and yeah, these short stories were piling up in the background, so I'm kind of going through those. I'm a slow writer as well, so it takes me a while. Most people can rattle off a short story in a couple of days. That I don't have that unfortunately that talent of being super quick and super good. And after that, I don't know really. After the short stories, I'm gonna take a look and see where I'm gonna go.
Awesome. Well, hey, Rio, I freaking love No Second Chances.
Thanks, man.
It's a book that also, it's one of those books that the more you think about it, the more you enjoy it. It's one that definitely would make a great film, and the characters are rich and vibrant and really like make it sing. So yeah, there's cool action, but your secret weapon is those characters. And
thanks, man.
And they're it's a really great book. So we'll I'm sure we'll talk when the next one happens, but I just really appreciate the time, and I hope writers get a little bit out of the spoiler discussion and see how you do it, because it's really neat.
I wish I knew.
Well, hey, I think you've given us some stuff to work with here to think about. So great book.
Thanks,
and
man.
Thank you everybody for listening. And is there anything else you want to tell people before we go? Last thoughts?
Go buy this book, for God's sakes.
And tell others to get it.
Spread the word, share the word. Yeah, exactly. If you want another book, you got to go buy this one.
And I do, so I definitely want people to. All right. Thank you very much, Rio. And I'm sure we'll see you on the podcast again.
That'd be great. Thank you, David.
All right.